Brian Watson, thank you very much for joining me today and welcome to the channel.
Happy to be here.
Let's start with the first question. Rewind to the very beginning of your journey. Can you paint a vivid picture of your past and experience in general, just to give our viewers a little bit more of an idea what you've been doing throughout your life?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I left school age 15. And back then, big companies, small companies, all companies used to take on trainees, if you like. I was taken on as a trainee, a messenger trainee. And I fell on my feet because I didn't realize that where I was going, the interview I was sent on by the then Youth Employment Service was a newly opened American ad agency in London's West End. And I went there. I couldn't believe the place when I walked in. I mean, it was just alive. It was electric, everything. People running around, talking this, that, the other. And basically, they gave me the job on the spot, which is quite handy, really, because my second interview was at a cartographer's in Victoria and I couldn't find it, which is ironic. So, yes, I got the job and I started as a messenger boy. And within, I think, about a year, I was running the mailroom. So I was only 16 then and running the mailroom. And from there, the talent that surrounded me, the creative people, saw that I was interested in creating ads. So they put me into what was called in those days a bullpen, which was a studio with drawing boards where the artworks were put together. So I learned how to do that. Then from there, I became a junior art director. Age 19, I did my very first ad for Volkswagen. That was my first ad, not my first ad for Volkswagen. It progressed from there. And 7 years later, I think it was, I left that agency and I was hired by another agency where I stayed for about a year. I wasn't a big fan of the place. They weren't as creative as I had been taught to be. So I stayed there a year and then I was hired by an agency called Foot Cone and Belding, FCB London, to work on the launch of British Airways. It was the merger of BOAC and BEA. The two airlines joined together and became British Airways. And that was very exciting. I ended up making the very first TV campaign for Concorde as well. And I stayed at that agency for quite a long time. I was there for 33 years, working on huge accounts, Dulux paint, Toyota cars, Leyland cars as they used to be in those days, Procter and Gamble, big business. And I really sort of learned quite a lot from that job. I learned a lot in the first job, but this job was dealing direct with the big clients. And then I was made an associate creative director. And in the early 80s, I was given a seat on the board, so I was a creative director. Along the way, I wrote for television. I used my experience to write other things. I started as an art director, but I then became art director writer. And from there, I went and started my own agency with another guy. That became a victim of a recession in the early 2000s. And since then, oh, I've missed one bit out actually. In the big agency, Foot Cone and Building, I started to direct my own scripts, and that was fantastic. I loved every second. I was full of trepidation when I first started doing it, but my first go at directing, we built the D-Day beaches on Camber Sands in Essex, I think it is, Camber Sands or Kent, can't remember. And it was one hell of an exciting day. We had to do it in a day, and we put up all the beach fortification, everything. Anyway, long story short, I was directing, and it turns out, unbeknown to me, but I have made more commercials than anyone else in the world. And it's been very exciting. And I then went on from, once we closed my own agency, I've written a spectacular stage musical, which I'm now in the process of getting the funding for. So if you know anyone who's got £12 million, let me know. I wrote the book about growing up in London in the 50s, that way. And we photographed scenes from my childhood. And it did quite well, actually. It didn't do too bad at all. It got some great write-ups in the papers. And Christmas 2011, it was in the top 10 Christmas books in the Daily Mail. So I did that. I continued to write bits and pieces for television. And right up to date, I did a few commercials for companies helping them out of the COVID lockdown. So that's really about where we are. So that's my, how many years? 58 years career in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you for sharing this. You're holding our Guinness World Record for the work you've done.
Yeah, so I'm
Tell me,
told.
that's a huge achievement. That's a huge achievement.
I didn't know. I mean, I was invited to a riverboat party, and little did I know it was in my honour. They presented me with the Guinness certificate on the, and I had no idea. But because I was making commercials for a newspaper, in those days, newspapers used to do a commercial a week, more or less, and with all the different versions of those commercials, it added up to somewhere north of 2,500 commercials,
Oh
which
wow,
is
that's a huge
big.
number.
Yeah, and now if I show anyone my show reel, I have to serve ice creams halfway through because it's the show reel's so long.
Okay, can you perhaps walk me a bit through the process of creating a commercial? You did tell me a story before when we spoke prior to the interview that you would jump into the car and by the time you would arrive in the office, you would have a script ready for it. But for those that don't know the industry really well, can you paint a picture of how the process would look like from
Yeah,
start to finish?
first and foremost, the newspaper industry operates in a totally different way because you've got to remember they put out a new product every day of the week. And they need to get on air very quickly so that they sell. It's normally they normally either go on television Friday night to sell Saturday's paper or Sunday night to sell Monday's paper. And you always worked with the top man, the editor, and his management team, the managing director and marketing director. They used to call me across to their office and they would brief me on whatever subject it was. And the great thing about doing ads for a newspaper, every subject is different. So you're not getting bored because just advertising the same product all the time. It's that because they would serialize a famous person's book, or they will serialize the latest diet, or a part work about Princess Diana or something like that. And they used to brief me and they'd say to me, well, we want to be on air by Friday and it's now Tuesday. So I would get in the cab to go back to the office, and as often as not, I'd written the script, come up with the idea and written the script in the back of the cab. It didn't always work like that because, you can't always pluck an idea out of the air. Then I would go back and present the script. They would have their say over it, but my hit rate was pretty high. And the next move is directing it for television. So I would kick everyone into gear. The producer, the crew, everybody's booked. Actors, if we need actors, we cast them. And we would try and shoot 24 hours later, which is crazy land, really. But it worked, and it worked for a very long time. And one specific was I got a phone call from the managing director, and he said, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" He said, "It's 4 o'clock now, and we want to be on air this evening, the centre break of Coronation Street, which was 3.5 hours away."
Oh my
So
gosh.
I got on the phone from the editor's office, and I got everyone in place, wrote the script, filmed something, obviously on video. You couldn't do it on film because obviously you wouldn't have time to process the film. I got a sound studio standing by, a voiceover on his way to that studio. The other half of my team was going to go and record the voiceover whilst I went and edited the film. And again, long story short, I got back to my office, switched the television on, and there was the commercial I'd just put together in 3.5 hours. It can be
That's
done.
that's
I wouldn't recommend it for everything because, you don't get the time to reflect on it, but it sold the paper, and that was the object. I mean,
it's not
there
for
was
the
one.
light-hearted people that can't
No,
handle the
it's not.
pressure.
And I tell you what, you don't put on weight. It's the best way to lose weight, I can assure you. And there was one commercial. It was the Windsor Jewels. The can't remember it. The king who abdicated. They bought some of his wife's jewellery, Wallis Simpson's jewellery, and they gave it away in a competition in the paper. And we put this together and it went out on air. That wasn't such a panic, but it was still pretty quick. And when it went out, we got the feeling actually that was really going to work, and it did. It knocked their circulation up by 25%. And the then managing director, who sadly is no longer with us, but I got back to my office and on my desk was a 12-bottle case of Cristal champagne. They were so appreciative. I did, not just me, the account man, and the other half of me, my team We got, and it was just wonderful. And what better way of working and enjoying yourself than doing something that is just so exciting? It was. I don't understand people who don't like their job, because I've loved every second, and I still do it. I'm even at my age, I'm still working.
Well, it's a debatable conversation, really, about loving or hating their jobs. So
Yes, it
we live in a
is.
society where everything is fast paced and people are dependent to earn money. So sometimes they don't have the option or choice, really, to go for a job they may love or enjoy.
No, I
And it's
agree.
very
I
hard. And
agree.
I'm not entirely sure where the fault lies, whether it is because people really need money and they take whatever lies in front of them, or whether it is the problem from of the society where they rush kids through the schooling system and don't really prepare them for life or give them the opportunity to figure out what they should be doing after they finish school, get a degree, anything else.
Yeah,
And on the other hand side, the companies today in today's world, in my perception or my view, they don't have any more time to take on individuals and teach them skills or take them through a
yeah,
process where they could explore different departments within a business and then maybe find the right fit. Everything is going into the complete different direction where an individual, you have to have a huge spectrum of experiences or skill sets, and then you're going to be considered for a role, but you're not going to get those skills and experiences without a job. So it is quite challenging
yeah.
or just a handful of people are fortunate enough, in my opinion, to find a job they really love. That's why we live in a time now where when COVID happened, people started to work remotely. They've experienced of seeing something beyond the walls that there is a life. They can spend time pursuing their hobbies, the things they love, the things they enjoy, because they work remotely. They have more time in their hands. So yeah, I agree with you. People should be doing what they love, and technically, it shouldn't be called a job because if you love what you're doing, then you don't work. But it is
No,
very
well,
challenging and hard.
I think you do work, but what you do is more like what you do anyway. You know, I, the number of stars, the TV and film stars that I've directed, I've got pictures of me with them, and people come into this house and they see them. They say, "You've worked with all these people." Yeah, but I didn't see it as work. I really enjoyed it. We had a laugh. We had fun. I do hear what you're saying, but I think even in a mundane job, you can find something somewhere that will give you a little bit more of a buzz. Obviously, there's lots of people in lots of jobs where they can't wait for 5:30 or whenever they finish and they rush out. I wouldn't go. I mean, and not just me, lots of other people in the ad industry. You'd really start work that time of night because there was so much going on in the office, and you couldn't help but get involved with what somebody else was doing and throwing in your suggestions, and people would throw in their suggestions to what you were doing. That we really started working at around about 6 in the evening. I mean, I used to work till midnight, not because I didn't want to, but because I really wanted to. And there was you didn't get paid overtime and all that stuff. You just got the salary that you were given. But to me, the essence of let's call it a creative job, is an extension of you. Because, see, when I joined that American ad agency, I didn't know I was creative. Yeah, at school I was very good at art and I was very good at English. And I personally, and I know other people would disagree with this, I do not believe you can teach creativity, but you can find it in a person and switch it on. And everybody's probably got this within them to a lesser or greater degree. But if you can get into a creative job, it's much, much more than a job. It's a job. I've got the best job in the world. Somebody once said about advertising, it's the best fun you can have with your clothes on. And it is. It was every single day. I and many others I worked with, if you were in the middle of a really exciting project, you couldn't wait to get back at your desk the next morning. And I agree. I'm lucky. And anyone like me in the same industry or similar industries are also lucky. I'm not sure what it's like if you work in a bank and are doing the same thing day in, day out, or a factory that's producing the same product day in, day out. But I hope somewhere people can find something in their job that they quite like.
Okay. So on that note, what career advice would you give someone wanting to start in a profession like yourself or in any profession?
Well, you know, I am passionate about big companies and all companies. I'm passionate about going back to the days when they took on juniors, trainees. And they did. It was every industry back in the 60s had somewhere, even if it was just making the tea, where they took a school leaver. My idea is that every kid should have a chance. You know, degree or no degree, every kid should have a chance. And there's a whole bunch of kids today that are not getting any chances. And I think we would all benefit from it if all kids were getting a chance. You only need a couple on some sink estate in North London or wherever who come home and say, I've just been given a pay rise. I'm really having a great time. I'm going to buy a car. Soon, the rest of them will want a share of that and they will go out and try and find work. You know, right now, I don't think there's an incentive to go and find work. But if companies went back to taking those kids straight from school, it's quite interesting. It doesn't, from the company's point of view, take much time out of the day when the other people who already work there should be doing other jobs. I mean, all I did was I shadowed somebody else and watched what they did. They didn't stop doing their job, but doing their job taught me masses. And I happened to be in an agency that had the finest talent, and an agency that really did change advertising forever.
Okay. And do you think there is something that the society could do to change that, to bring back maybe that option or possibility of school droppers to be hired by companies?
I don't know. I don't know what I've had this conversation with many people. I think What you don't want is a directive from government to say companies have got to do this, because then that's dictatorial. You want companies to realise totally and utterly that when they take on a kid straight from school, that person will be eager to learn. Now, as you said earlier, there's all the different departments, different disciplines, and that person will find the one that fits them the best. But you train that school leaver up. He's a loyal. She is a loyal employee, a very loyal employee, because that is where they trained. Now, yeah, they will eventually leave because that's the name of the game. You leave to get more money, or you leave to get more experience or more opportunity. I think companies now should be looking into this. It always worked back then. And lots of my contemporaries in the ad industry, even in different departments, people running the agencies, they started as messengers. It can be done. You don't, it's very interesting because if you're academic, you're quite happy with the whole situation of sitting down, learning, being lectured to on certain subjects, and then sitting your degree. But I wasn't academic at all. I hated it. As I said earlier, I happened to be good at English and I happened to be good at art. And I'm forever grateful to the youth employment officer who sent me to that job, because I didn't know what an ad agency did. I mean, I knew that there were ads on television and ads in the papers, but I didn't know how they got there. But I very soon found out. And when you saw all around you how exciting it was, you wanted to learn. You had a hunger for learning. And as I explained where I went from messenger boy to creative director, seat on the board, and owning my own agency, I never dreamt I would do anything like that.
Okay, thank you for sharing this. Looking back at your life, at all the highs and possibly lows, is there a time where you wish you could go back and do things differently? Or were you quite happy and satisfied how things progressed in your life in general?
Every day when you create, you're a creator. You always question what you're doing, because you have to give it the overnight test. You might one day, and I've done it hundreds of times, I'd run up and down the corridor saying, "Hey, look at this, what I've come up with," and show people and say, "Yeah, yeah, yeah," and then I'd pin it on the wall, and I'd give it what was called the overnight test. And when I walked into my office the next morning, I tore it down and thought, "Did I do that?" and put it in the bin. You see, you can hit the idea right the first time, but lots of times you miss it by a mile and there's something better. So, yeah, I mean, I had lots of times when I wanted to do something, do it differently, and it wasn't over periods of years, it was over 24 hours. That's how you get the best work. You need the time just to give it the overnight test. But having said that, working on those newspaper commercials, and you didn't have the overnight test. You had to hit it right first time. And thankfully, the powers that be that gave me the ideas somewhere it worked.
Okay. And what's a piece of advice you've received that stuck with you throughout your life, and why?
Okay, well, funny enough, it's more or less what I was saying just now. Don't run with your first thought. Give it time. And the overnight test. I've sort of answered that question retrospectively, because if you don't give it the overnight test and it goes and the client sees it, you may regret it the next day because you'll think, "Oh, that is crap." And what always stuck with me was what one of my mentors said. Exactly that. Don't run with your first thought. Give it time. And I actually think that works in practically any industry, because whatever job you're in, you're given responsibilities, and you may say something that you think is a great idea that would improve the way the company works, for example, and then the next morning be slightly embarrassed about telling your boss because actually when I woke up this morning it didn't sound like such a good idea.
Okay. And let's move to habits. What is a habit that had a positive impact on your life, and how did you develop it?
I don't know if you'd call it a habit, but I'm very OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, they call it. I don't really call it a disorder. I call it a bonus because it makes you strive for absolute perfection. And that has stuck with me. I still do it. I mean, people walk into this office here and they say, it's so tidy. Yeah, I know it is, but I know where everything is. And especially when you're a creative in an agency or any other business where you're a creative, you want what your thought or your idea is to be portrayed in the most perfect way. You know, I would tinker, and not just me, but anybody who did my job, you would tinker with even moving copy and type around on the page just to make it look nicer. And when it looks nicer, it reads better. So yeah, I think being a bit OCD has been something that I've used, and it's still with me, and I'll probably use it until the day I depart this mortal coil, because I just think I like then what I see, and if I like what I see, I'm sure the people that it's aimed at will find it easier to read and absorb.
Okay, thank you for sharing this. You said you were very fortunate to how your career progressed from mailroom to an executive position. But what would you say, who are the most important people in your life growing up, and how did they shape you as a person? Besides those people who shaped you as an individual during your career, is there anyone else you took inspiration from?
I, without a doubt, I took inspiration from my mum and dad and my aunts and uncles, simply because they had been to hell and back experiencing the war, and yet they were always laughing, always having fun, always encouraging each other to move on and better themselves. I found them a total inspiration because this was the back streets of London, South London, and none of them had anything, but we were given everything. And I don't necessarily mean that in monetary terms. I'm talking about their attitude, their way of life, their I'm trying to think of the word. It's like they knew that if they didn't laugh, have fun, and be nice, everything would collapse around them. Even them, they would give up. They couldn't get through it. And I've had that in my head all of my life, and I've completely done the same thing. I mean, when I was directing, I used to have people queuing up to get on my shoots. I mean, crew. And I didn't know. I mean, my first assistant director told me all this. He said, I get people ringing me up. How do we get on a Watson shoot? And I said, why do you think that is? He said, well, because from the moment you shout turn over to the moment you wrap, we haven't stopped laughing and having fun. And it all shows in the results that come out the camera. So I would say that family, aunts and uncles, mum and dad, they just were inspiring. But of course, within my career, there were other people who were a huge inspiration. Great advertising writers, great advertising art directors, and creative directors. You know, that rub off is different, but it's essential in the job you're doing. I used to sit there and see an ad that somebody had done, and I'd just look at it and say, oh, I wish I'd done that. So the next time I had an ad to do, I tried to beat that, which made me better at my job. So it wasn't just family that inspired me. There were lots of other people throughout my life in advertising who inspired me too. And also other, great directors. Ridley Scott, who I've worked with when he was a commercials director. People like that, you want to at least get close to what they're capable of.
What do you think is the biggest challenge facing younger generations today?
I I go back to what I said about the big companies not taking on younger people to train them. I think that is a huge challenge, and you know, I'm not against the degree or anything of that ilk, but there are lots of kids that don't have a degree because they're not that way inclined. I think it's a huge challenge, and I think companies could make it so much better, and not just better for the company or the individual they're employing, for the whole of society, because the more you take young people off the street and into what could end up as a really good career, hence I'm sitting here and I did exactly that. It is a challenge. And back then, I feel that everyone got a chance. I mean, I never thought as a 15-year-old I would leave school and end up where I've ended up. I just think that somebody has got to look at this, and there is a great scope in taking kids straight from school. People may disagree with me, but I really think that I'm right. I don't. There is no comparison with today to back when I started. No comparison at all. It's harder now, much harder, and I don't think it needs to be.
Okay, let's move to the final question. You've shared a lot of stories, very exciting memories, provided some guidance, a little bit of wisdom, but that's the final question. Apart from everything you said during the interview, what would be your final word of wisdom to the younger generation?
I think it's really quite simple. Never give up. You will get there in the end. If you're determined, you will get there in the end. Discipline yourself and you'll win. You don't need someone to discipline you, you need you to discipline you. Go with yourself, not the crowd. Sure, go along with the crowd, but lead the crowd. There's a huge benefit in never giving up. It's too easy to give up. Don't do it. Really don't do it. When your back's against the wall, and my back has been against the wall many times throughout my career, you come up with the answer. And you will come up with it. Believe me, I have thought several times in my career it was all up because of the circumstances at the time. But I went away, and when my back was against the wall like that, I used to go to the park near the office and just wander around the park and just think about it. You will find the answer. And I'll say it again, never give up. You're better than that.
Brian, I really wanted to thank you very much for making the time to speak to me, sharing your stories, wisdom, guidance, and shedding some light on your industry experience and potentially motivating someone to take the same career path and seeing the bigger picture that is worthwhile, putting a lot of work into it, a lot of effort, and not giving up as being the motto to reach the goals that someone want to reach. Thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you.